Alright, so today in our notebook, when we go into our table of contents, I want you to skip 2 pages because there's some integer vocabulary we have to go back and get later on. But for right now, after you skip 11, 12, on 13, 14, I want you to put integer addition and subtraction. And our date today is the 17th. All right, so then we're going to go to page 14. So off to the right, and we're going to look at this. So you saw this a little bit in class today and Thursday, Friday of last week. So go ahead and label this integer addition and subtraction. And hopefully you were able to get these rules today as you did the activities with the counters, but if not, that's okay. So we're going to be talking about them right now. So there's 3 things that can happen when we add or subtract integers. The first thing, the first case, is if we have 2 positive numbers. And if that happens, if you have 2 positive numbers, this is the easiest one, you just add normally. So for example, if we have 3 plus 4, again, try to circle these numbers. So if you look at the 3, there's nothing in front of it, so you know it's positive. And you know the 4 is positive because there's a positive in front of it. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. There we go. So we have 2 positive numbers, 3 plus 4. When we add those, we know it's 7. Another example is if we have something like 6 plus 3. Again, in front of the 6, there's no sign, so you know it's positive. In front of the 3, there's a positive sign. So they're both positive. Just add normally. We know 6 plus 3 is 9. So that's the easiest case. The second case is if you have 2 negative numbers. So you have a negative sign in front of both the numbers. What happens here is you still want to add. You're going to add the digits, but the answer is negative. So looking at a couple examples, if we have something like -3 and a -4 here, if we circle both the numbers and the sign that's in front of them, there's a negative sign in front of both of these. So when we have a -3 and a -4, we add. 3 plus 4 is 7, and we just keep the negative in front, so -7. Same thing if we were to have a -6 and a -3. Again, there's a negative, you see 2 negative signs because there's a negative sign in front of each of these numbers. So 2 negative numbers, we add them. -6 plus 3 is 9, and you keep the negative in front of the answer. So we add, but your answer is negative. The third case that you'll see is you will have 1 positive and 1 negative number. So when this happens, you have 1 positive and 1 negative number, you're just going to subtract the digits and keep the sign of the bigger digit. I'm going to say larger digit. So looking at a couple examples with this one, so subtract the digits, keep the sign of the larger digit. If we look at something like -3 plus 7. So there's a negative in front of this 3, there's a positive in front of this 7, so we have a negative and a positive. Subtract, 7 minus 3 is 4. Now 7 is larger than 3, so it's just going to be a positive 4. Now if we look at something like 3 minus 7. Again, this 3 is positive because there's nothing in front of it. This 7 is negative because there's a negative in front of it. So we subtract. 7 minus 3 is 4. But with this one, 7 is larger, and there's a negative sign in front of it, so it's going to be a negative 4. Looking at one more example, we can have something like negative 7 plus 3. Again, negative in front of the 7, positive in front of the 3, so we have a negative and a positive. So we subtract. 7 minus 3 is 4. But this 7 is larger, and there's a negative sign in front of it, so it's a negative 4. So really what we're looking at, these two, if the signs are the same, two negatives or two positives, we add them. And then the answer is just whatever the numbers were before. So if they were both negative, the answer is negative. If they were both positive, the answer is positive. If the signs are different, we have a negative and a positive, you subtract and then keep the sign of the larger digit. Now what you will see, and we're going to look at this more tomorrow, so go ahead and we're going to add a little note at the bottom. Sometimes signs will be right next to each other. So when there are parentheses, or signs right next to each other. What you do is first just ignore the parentheses. Just kind of get rid of them. So you're just going to ignore them, get rid of them. And then what you will do is you have to combine signs. So what I mean by that is you might see a positive and a negative right next to each other. If that happens, you're just going to make it a negative. You might see a negative and a positive right next to each other. When that happens, you'll make it a negative. So if there are different signs next to each other, it turns into a negative. If you ever see two negatives right next to each other, it's going to turn into a positive. And then on the rare occasion you see two positives next to each other, that's also a positive. So if they're the same sign, it comes into a positive. If they're different, it's a negative. So a couple examples. You might see something like negative 7, then minus negative 2. So we have these parentheses, which we know we can just kind of ignore, but we have these signs right next to each other. They're right next to each other. There's no number in between. So those signs are going to turn into a positive. So this is really going to turn into negative 7 plus 2. And we know from our rules before, it's a negative and a positive, so we subtract. 7 minus 2 is 5, but 7's larger, so it's negative 5. Another example you might see of this, negative 8 plus negative 7. So again, two signs right next to each other. There's no number in between this positive and negative sign. Only the parentheses, but we just want to ignore those. A positive and a negative right next to each other will turn into a negative. So this will be negative 8 and a negative 7. So we get negative 15. All right, there's a couple examples. I want you to try some now. The ones I want you to try. So we're going to say, you try negative 3 plus 6, negative 8, and minus 4, or negative 8, negative 4, however you want to think of it, and 4 plus 1. And then I also want you to try a couple with the parentheses. So you might see negative 3 plus negative 6. Now let's just rewrite this one together real quick. So again, just get rid of the parentheses, so it's just regular negative 3. Now we have this positive and negative right next to each other. Positive and negative turn into a negative. So those signs combine into one negative, and then just bring down your 6. So you'll solve that. Negative 8 plus a negative 2. And then the last one I want you to try is 4 minus a negative 7. So these two, you'll have to combine these signs to turn them just into one sign. All right, but go ahead and try these 6 problems, see what you get. Looking at these real quick, negative 3 plus 6, different signs. We have a negative sign and a positive sign, so we'll subtract. We subtract, we get 3. The 6 is larger, so it stays positive 3. This one, we have a negative 8 and a negative 4. So they're both negative, so we add them. 8 plus 4 is 12, and the answer stays negative, negative 12. 4 plus 1, they're both positive, so we just add, and we get 5. This one, we already changed it. They're both negative. 6 plus 3 is 9, and the answer stays negative, so we get negative 9. This one we want to rewrite. We have a positive and a negative right next to each other, a sign with no number in between. So bring everything down. The positive and the negative just turn into one negative. Bring down the 2. Negative 8 and a negative 2, they're both negative, so we add. We get 10, and the answer is negative. This one we want to rewrite. 2 negatives right next to each other. 2 negatives right next to each other with no number turn into a positive. 4 plus 7, just add normally, we get 11. Awesome. Thank you. We'll look at these more tomorrow.